Okay, so we've just finished signing the transaction to create the user, right? In the previous video, we went through, signed the authentication token. We sent the request. Eventually, we send it via an AJAX call, and we're essentially running the callback to get back out of this function, right? So all of this was written right here, right? This is kind of what set off all of this, web token authentication, all of that stuff, right? Was because we called this function here. We were just writing this API.request with a post to the users and the parameters we were using previously to create the user. So one thing that I thought would be useful to do at this point is print out the response that we get back from the Mixin network. So if we refresh the page and essentially create a user, what I'm doing is I'm going to console log what's responded to us by the Mixin network. You can see here that we're calling that callback, and in that callback we're passing the response parameter, and I'm just going to print that out so we can see what exactly gets passed back from the Mixin network when we create a user. Excuse me. So you can see here we have things like created at. This is the timestamp that we created the user. As far as the Mixin network is concerned, you can see the full name. That's the UUID that we created in the previous video. You can see has pin is equal to false. What else is here? We have a pin token, which is going to be important coming up here in a second. There are no relationships because we just created this user. We also have a session ID, a type. In this case, you can create a bunch of different things on the Mixin network, but in this case, we created a user, and then you have a user ID associated with the user. So that's everything that gets returned to us from the Mixin network, essentially saying, yes, you did indeed create this user. The first thing we're going to do with that user is we're going to cache it in the browser. Again, this is a bad form. It's not safe, but we're going to do it for brevity's sake. If you remember back from the previous accounts video, this is us storing all the data that we just got back from the Mixin network. The user ID is that user ID down here that was created. The session ID is the session ID right here. The pin token is right here, and the private key, well, we already knew because we sent that. So after we've cached the user, there's one more thing we need to do with the user. You can see here we have has pin is equal to false, right? So it's really hard to do anything on the Mixin network without first creating a pin. So the first thing that we do after we cache the user is we update their pin. So this is a quick little function right here that is the old pin and the new pin. In this case, it's a brand new user. They don't have an old pin, so we're just going to set it to an empty string, and then we have a new pin. And you can see here it's almost identical, right? Like I said, we're going to keep reusing this method over and over and over again. This is how we're interacting with the Mixin network, is by this abstraction of request code that we had written before. It takes care of all the authentication and sending the call via AJAX. So we're going to keep reusing that method. In this case, rather than posting to the user's route, we're going to post to the pin/update route. And obviously, it's because we want to update the pin. However, there's one thing that we do need to do before, we can't just send the pin in unencrypted form. In fact, the Mixin network will not accept that if we do that. So this big old long chunk of code that I'm about to show you is purely so that we can encrypt the pin when we send it to the Mixin network. It's very important that we do this. So this is a whole lot of code. I'll openly admit that. It's going to be quite a bit confusing. The end goal here, though, is if you look at this last bit of code, we're doing a lot of data manipulation with arrays and concatenating buffers and all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, it's really just so that we can encrypt we can encrypt the buffer that we're creating, which I'll show you what data is in that buffer, using our pin key. So that's essentially the end goal of this function, is we want to encrypt our buffer using the pin key that was sent back to us from the Mixin network, this pin key down here. So I shouldn't be showing you all this stuff, right? I shouldn't be showing private keys and all that stuff, but I think it's important to piece this apart one by one in order to get a good understanding. And since this is a demo, I'm not going to use this user for anything, so feel free to hack this user if you if you so choose. So the first thing we're doing is we're passing in this pin. We're going to check if the pin token, the session ID, the private key, the iterator, all these things are defined. In our case, when we're creating the user, when we call this function, the only thing we're defining is the pin, which is the pin that the user set originally. So obviously all these things are not going to be defined, so the first thing we do is pull them out of the browser, which is where we just stored them. So after that, we are going to create a buffer out of the pin token. You can see here I'm printing out the private key. This is in PEM format originally, so what we do is we get the private key out of the PEM, and we're going to do that so we can call this decrypt method on the private key. At that point, we're going to decrypt the pin token that got sent back to us using our private key. The reason we can do that is because we signed the transaction before we sent it to the Mixin network, so they know that we're able to decrypt this pin token using our private key. From there, I'm printing out the pin key. It's going to be a lot of gibberish, but I figured why the hell not, so we can follow what's going on here. Then we're console logging the pin. The pin is in plain text at this point, so we need to turn that into a buffer, and that is so we can concatenate the time and the iterator that we created up here. This is mostly just to kind of create randomness in our buffer, essentially, is the big reason that we're doing that, and that is this buffer that, again, we're trying to sign down here, or sorry, rather encrypt, using that pin key that we got sent back originally. So we're creating this buffer, we're adding a bunch of padding to it, and that's because this crypto cipher library is expecting those buffers and the padding in the buffer and all that stuff. I think because we're using an IV16 cipher type, so we create these random bytes and pass that as a third parameter into the create cipher method. Once again, though, the whole reason we're doing this is so we can get this pin key, we can encrypt the buffer that we've created up here at this point with all these other things, and then we're going to send this encrypted pin buffer back along to the Mixin network as part of this update pin call, right? So this is a very, very long-winded way of saying this is how you're going to encrypt data before you send it to the Mixin network. So in this case, we're encrypting a pin, but most of the things that you're going to want to encrypt, you're going to want to do it very similar to this way. So it's a lot of code, but like I said in the previous video, it's very important code to understand when dealing with the Mixin network. So what we're going to do is we're going to refresh the browser like we did previously, and we're going to print out all these things that I talked about before, just to kind of show you what they look like. Again, most of them are going to be just random noise because they're buffers and encrypted data and all this other stuff, but why the heck not. So you can see here that I just created my pin, and all this stuff gets printed out. Oh, that's because I clicked the create wallet button too many times. Let's refresh the page and do this just once so we can follow the trace of the code here. Okay, so we sent the data along to the Mixin network. You can see I'm printing out private key here. Again, it's in PEM format, so we need to get it out of PEM format, and this is what the private key object looks like. You can see it has a decrypt method associated with it, and that's the decrypt method that we're calling right here. So after that, I print out the pin key. You can see it's just a big old long mess, but it's that's because we've decrypted it using the pin token and the private key at that point. From there, you can see the pin. Like I said, the pin is in plain text at this point. You can see that's the pin I used to create this user. Then we create a buffer out of that. What am I printing out after that? The buffer with the pin, the time, and the iterator concatenated together. That's what this is. Again, it's not very useful. From there, I print out the padding array just to show you that it's an array of tens, essentially. And then I'm printing out the buffer after the concatenation has been done to it. In this case, you can see the pin is up there at the front, the time is back here, and then the iterator. And then I didn't print anything else out because, again, that's not very useful, right? It's just a bunch of, it's going to be a bunch of random strings because we've done a bunch of encryption, decryption, and all those other things. Okay, so at this point, we've sent the token back. We've sent the PIN back to the Mixin network saying, hey, I want to update this user's PIN. And when they come back to us at this point, they should have that has PIN equals to true. And if you remember far back to what where we had originally made this call, right? We called this create user method in the mixin.js, but we called it from the wallet, right? When we created a new wallet, we wanted to call this create user function. And after all that happens, finally we should get back to this line of code. And the next thing we're going to want to do is redirect to the account route. So I commented that out because I wanted to stop ourselves from redirecting so we can print things out and see what's going on here. But the next flow of the code will be to redirect to the accounts route. So at that point, we'll have created a user. Everything will be good, and we should be able to show things associated with that account, right? But currently, nothing happens, right? We still need to write that code. We'll essentially be popping out in app.js, and we'll be in this branch of code here, right, where we're redirecting to the account. And you can see here that the user is already logged in. Let's show their assets. So that's what we'll do in the next video. See you then.